People who quit a job in the heat of the moment, what sheet show did you leave them to handle? Shoppers faking drug mart. Point: I had simply asked for better hours after working ridiculous late night hours for over a year. Instead they hired a new guy and gave him the exact hours I asked for and then had me train him. So when training wasn't going very well because new guy was super slow, they blamed me for it. Point: now I had a good standing with everyone at this store, but I didn't need shoppers and I let a lot of sheet slide every day. So again, when I asked for a vacation that I deserved because I was never sick and punctual as all hell, I was denied it, and the next day the manager had 4 weeks of vacation set. So to make it up to me, they offered me all these insane overtime shifts for the next 3 weeks. So I waited for the frozen deliveries to arrive that same day. The boss was packing up to go home, and when he said goodnight to me I said, "But who is going to do this frozen delivery?" He laughed and said, "You are." So I replied, "Nope." And he became super cross, so I started laughing. "What are you laughing about?" he says. So I said, "Fuck yourself. I quit." Now there was no one to finish the night shift. Point: he immediately asks for the uniform. Lol. Now I said, "Fuck yourself. I quit." I had never done that before or since. Uniform went in the trash. I worked as a small engine repair tech for a larger company. I'm also in the National Guard. I had gotten hurt and needed physical therapy, and 1 or 2 days a month I would have to miss because of an extended drill weekend. Well, my boss didn't like that, and she decided that she would punish me by making me stay later than everyone else. She was punishing me for going to physical therapy for a workplace injury and for being a soldier. Now, you may be thinking, having to stay late to keep up on your work doesn't sound like that much of a punishment. Normally, you would be right, but trust me, she was doing a lot more to make sure it was a punishment. Point: well, one day after being told that I was not given approval for the 1 day of vacation I asked for 3 months in advance to go see the eclipse, and generally being treated like a slave, I was like, why am I doing this to myself? And clocked out at the end of my shift. That next Monday after drill weekend, I showed up, packed up all my tools and took off. My boss started freaking out when she saw what I was doing. I left and found out that me leaving cost her over $100k because she had to ship my workload to another state to get another shop to work on them. That meant she needed to pay to ship them and then pay to ship them back, and since her shop didn't do any of the actual work, she never saw any money for any of the repairs. It was over 80 riding mowers. Oh boy. Let me tell you of my last day of Walmart. It's Monday morning, my day off, and I was pulling out of MD Anderson after getting blood work done when I receive a call from my manager. Let's call her Dushkanu. Dushkanu asks me to come into work because of 2 call-outs. Thinking that I did not have anything else planned and could use the overtime, I agreed. I informed her over the phone it would take me an hour to get home, dress, and drive to work. All I heard was a annoyed "Fine, just get here." 1 hour later I arrived at work. Just as I was getting to the deli where I work, my manager, who was behind the counter by herself, starts yelling at me for being late in front of not 1, not 2, but a line of customers. I attempt to remind her of our conversation, but she cuts me off, tosses me her apron, and storms out of the deli. I'm forced to shrug it off, apologize to the customers, and get to work. Later, I have a customer walk to the deli and ask about our rotisserie chicken, something not uncommon. I explain it will be over an hour before they are ready and suggest driving 5 minutes north to the other Walmart. He nods, thanks me, and walks away towards the front. I thought nothing of it and continued to cook popcorn chicken. 5 minutes later, the same customer comes back with none other than Dushkanu, who is asking me about the rotisserie chicken. I, once again, attempt to explain how long the chicken has left to cook and the suggestion I made. No sooner than, when I finished speaking, she berates me for being lazy and telling a customer to go elsewhere. I ask what else is there I could do, as I couldn't make the oven cook faster. Her next words stick to this day: "I want you to do your damn job, or you can kiss it goodbye." A moment of pause from everyone. Zoan may have been listening in the entire time, as well as the customers they were helping. I ponder, then smile. Okay. I apologize to Zoe and May, wish them the best of luck, and walk out of the deli towards my manager. I stop in front of her, take off my apron, kiss it, say goodbye, and walk out of the store. I still have my name badge, and had to this day point at it. I apologize for any mistakes, and I'm fixing them as you point them out. Thank you for your interest, feedback, upvotes, and the back patting. When I get the chance, I'll cross-post this to r/Talis from retail with more description. I worked 25 years for a large company in the sales division. I was making 6 figures and had earned my role as VP of the West Coast. My plan was to stick around to retirement, but then we got a new president. And the new president was an asshole to everyone. I saw one sales guy walk up all excited and offer a handshake to meet him. The president didn't shake the extended hand and instead said, "I can't believe you came here without polishing your shoes." The president gave a directive for me to stop hiring people with business or sales experience and to start just hiring attractive men and women. Because their good looks will sell products better than the educated words of a veteran salesperson. Plus they are young and work cheaper. I went along with this request and made 2 such hires. Then the next request came along. Tell me who is the worst member of your team right now. I explained my team was #1 in the company and we're all doing well, but the weakest one 8-year employee who had a bad year last year. He was making less frequent calls and the quality of calls was dropping. I had to place him on a PIP to improve in 3 months. And he did. He busted ass, worked long hours and weekends, and moved into the #1 spot on my team. Point at the end of the 3 months, president calls me to discuss the PIP. I explain the great progress and that I want to release him from the PIP because he is on track now. The reply was, well, there's probably other things wrong with him anyway, so terminate him and document it. Make sure to hire a young attractive person as a replacement. I quit on the spot with 0 days notice, unusual for a white collar job, and told him to do his own dirty work. Now I work as a high school teacher. Lol. Worked for a landscape company doing new installs. Our owner was cheap with a bad habit of constantly biting off more than he could chew. One year he asked if we wanted any part of a school project in a city we didn't live in, over 2 hours away, and we said no. He said that was fine and would just bid on one school for his crew who lived in that area. Instead he bid on multiple schools and got 3 of them. Obviously, none of us are happy about this, and he claimed that he'd put us up in hotels so we wouldn't have to commute. He never did. Point the work itself sucked way more than a crew our size could handle, and the owner's brother did absolutely nothing. He was supposed to be the project manager / supervisor, and literally all he did was play Clash of Clans on his phone and yell about people not being fast enough. After a few days, I was done. I'd grown sick of the job anyway, but this project really sealed it. Having to commute 4+ hours a day and then physically destroy myself was taking a toll fast. I woke up Friday morning, called the owner, told him I quit and to stop taking more work than he can manage. He blew up, but I just hung up the phone and went back to sleep. 2 weeks later I get a call from him. He's begging me to come back because after I quit, 2 other guys did too. The project is now woefully behind schedule and he's going to get fined if things don't pick up and get finished. I told him he should have thought of that before he bit off more than he could chew and expected a small crew to do it all in a short time frame. He got quiet and then asked if a 50-cent raise would get me back. No. Last time I ever heard from him, and I can't find his company website anymore. I've only done this once in my life, but it was a really crazy situation. My first professional job was an event planner for a small business, like 3 people. I was 24, and I worked there for a year. After about 5 months, my boss became extremely abusive. She would make little snide remarks about my terrible skills or time management or organizing. She stopped talking to me and would basically act like I wasn't there unless it was to criticize me for something. One day she asked me if I implemented a new filing system she had learned from the bank she used to work at. I replied no, as she hadn't yet showed me how to do so. She said, with a stack of papers in her hand, "Well, I guess giving you these would be faking useless then." Another. Example is that she would find little ways in which I was being pert or snide in some way, usually something completely BS, and would make me sign forms saying we had meetings about my behavior and listed all the things we would do to change it and help me grow. Like I worked for a big corporation or something with an hour department and not a private office with literally one boss. If I argued why I wasn't doing so, she made me sign something saying I was refusing training. I literally have no idea who those papers were for. Stuff like that point it made me so paranoid and unhappy. I spent many lunches crying in my car and many nights stressed out completely after work. I couldn't understand what had changed and felt so stupid and helpless. My coworker had just left, so it was just the two of us, and I gave my 2 weeks because the thought of being alone in an office with her was unbearable. As soon as I left her office, she called her mom to complain about me ditching her and talked about how happy she would be with me gone, while I was about 10 feet away in another room with the doors open. I lost it, got up from my desk and grabbed my purse, went to her office and told her that I was leaving for good. Right this minute. I was shaking and terrified, and she was furious. She told me, good luck finding another job in this town. I know everybody. Spoiler alert, I did point. The kicker, what I didn't know at the time was that my coworker had been feeding her BS the whole time. When it started to affect how I was being treated and I would complain or talk about it, guess who also told my boss all of that? Yup, with many embellishments, of course. I had zero experience with people like that and overlooked many clues, like how she would stay after work a lot to finish her assignments, while in reality she was staying to tattle on me because I was so new to the real world and naive. I found out all of this a few months later from one of her friends I ran into who she had also screwed over in some way. It made me stronger, and after I left my boss had to deal with scrambling to find people to do all her events, and I'm sure it was hell. I felt happy about that at first, but now that I'm 10 years older I can see things differently. She definitely could have handled it better, but it was her first boss job too, and she maybe had some things to learn herself. Gaming site I used to write for. This all happened in the span of 2 months. The new owner made us writers lose all credibility by writing unedited articles on his own and posting them freely, and they were the most widely ridiculous and racist pieces I'd ever read. In one of them, he said women only bought the Wii because they use the Wii remote as a vibrator. It made the rest of us look bad. He fired my friend simply because he didn't like him. He tried to claim my friend kept our review copy of Skyward Sword. There was more stuff that he did that I can't remember. My father died in December of that year. I informed everyone. I had also lost internet access for a while because my provider was switching the way their routers and stuff connected. I had too much going on at the time to deal with that. When I connected to the McDonald's Wi-Fi one day I read a fucking barrage of emails from the new owner, all amounting to where the fuck are you, and why aren't you writing anything. I emailed him, and everyone on the writing staff, and told him he could go fuck himself. 90% of the writing staff followed. 5 writers quit that day, and people took notice. The site never recovered, and today it only exists as a landing page and hub for one podcast that just refuses to die. After that, the owner took to stalking the guy who hired most of his writing staff, online harassment, and most recently, he hacked the previous owner's email and stole his Destiny 2 review code. He's still out there being a dick, but I only hear about it since I have him blocked on all social media. Worked at a KFC. A kid had shat into his hands and flung it at the ceiling where it promptly fell down and splattered on the floor. From what I had gathered, sometimes you have to do shitty, no pun intended, things in your job. I wish we had the staff to be able to do shitty things. We are supposed to have 4 people out front, 3 serving/packing, 1 on the floor. They only had me because they wouldn't get anyone else in. I had to straight up tell people, yes ma'am, I know there's shit on the floor in the toilet, but I can't clean it right now because there's 20 people in the queue and I have to pack orders. People in the middle of the queue started shouting open another till, like I can just magic people from thin air. A woman waiting for her order is giving me the evilest faking glare that I'm taking an order rather than packing hers an. I just faking gave up. I had 2 hours left in my shift. It was only going to get busier, so I just left the front, grabbed my sheet from the locker room, and walked out without saying a word. All I wanted was to get home, log onto OW, crack open a beer and win down in what ended up being a near orgasmic level of peace point. So yeah, there was maybe 20 people waiting in line, including people who had paid for food and were waiting, sheet on the ceiling and floor in the men's toilets, and nobody to serve customers. Quite the shit show point. I regret leaving people there who had paid for food, but there's only so much you can handle, especially when it feels like you've got 20 odd people mad at you and no one to back you up. I was working at a small bar/hotel in some remote place. The manager was an absolute jackass, just rude to staff and the customers and unpleasant to be around. There was only a small handful of staff there expected to work all day every day, myself included. We were casuals. I worked 9 long days in a row, finishing really late and getting up really early in the morning to come back and clean the hotel, with not many hours in between. Pretty sure illegal in Norse. It also wasn't that close to my house, about a 40-minute drive each way. I had a day off after my long stint doing lots of shifts, which I was excited about, and planned a nice day out with my boyfriend, but the manager rings me the day before to ask me to cover someone's shift who wanted it off. I said no, I had plans. He lost his sheet and told me when I started I agreed to work weekends and I need to be available. Well yeah, I worked every weekend since I started, and I would have been available, but I wasn't rostered on originally. Decided I had enough of being treated like crap and the money wasn't worth it to dread coming to work. I don't like confrontation, and felt bad my friend got me the job, so I wrote a letter quitting and planned to leave it on manager's desk and GTFO of there. Plan half failed, cause I got asked to stay back at work and panicked cause manager was out, so it was perfect to leave the letter on his desk, but if I stayed back he'd be back, and I wouldn't have the chance. Stayed back for a bit, then decided stuff it, I'm leaving, so said I forgot I had an appointment, dropped the letter and ran. I was casual so didn't have to give notice. Manager has a big party booked in for the next day, and I was his only staff who could work it. Not anymore. He rang me non-stop for 2 days and I ignored it. Best decision ever. Edit. 40 minutes not 49 lol, oddly specific. I had a job as a fairly niche field service engineer in it. Started off covering my local area, which was fine, maybe an hour traveling time to my most remote site, tops. Then they lost an engineer in my adjacent territory, and I had to cover that to put my travel time up to about 2.5 hours each way. That wasn't great, but it was temporary, allegedly. Then they lost a further engineer and guess what? I had to cover that area too. That meant I was having to do up to 4 hours driving each way just to get to a site, and then they expected me to put in up to a full 8-hour day. I mentioned this to my manager and pointed out that if I was pulling multi-day jobs at a site 4 hours away it'd be far better to put me up in a hotel, but they said nah, as it was unusual for me to do multi-day installs. Anyway, a month or so later, I was expected to put in a complete new system at a site, spec'd up for full days to do it. High profile client, and I basically told my manager I needed a hotel. They pushed back. It's only 4 days, you'll be fine. Just charge them the travel time as worked hours. Which is fine, but I was salaried, and they were the ones invoicing the client, so no overtime for me. Anyway, on the second day I arrived at nearly lunchtime after a massive accident on the motorway held me up for 4 hours, and got a complete bowl, locking off the client for it. I thought fuck this. Packed my tools, left the site with their old system ripped out, and a pile of unopened boxes of new kit, switched off my mobile and drove to head office. Parked close enough to the main entrance that the car operated the automatic doors, went into reception, and told the receptionist, very politely, it wasn't her fault that I quit. All my gear was in the car and here are my keys, phone and pass. Then walked out and got a cab home. Found out from a friend that they lost that client, which was one of their main ones, even after my manager basically spent the rest of the week installing the kit on his own, without any documentation as I'd written the spec, and accidentally kept it. I quit a few hours after my shift was over, but the next day was one of our most physically intense work days. For 6 months my supervisors kept promising a raise/promotion that never came. No matter how many more responsibilities I got, or how well I worked, all I got were empty promises. It also didn't help that my mental/physical health was starting to suffer. I sucked it up for a long time, hoping that things would eventually get better, but they didn't. When I had enough, I sent in a text message to the group chat that all of the workers were a part of, and said something like, "Don't expect me at work tomorrow, or in the future." I quit. Once I sent in that message, a few co-workers tried reaching out to me, and one of my supervisors tried to get in touch. I assume they were trying to get me to change my mind, but I was set on what I did, so I never spoke to any of my former supervisors. And it was a bit of a while before I fully opened up to my former co-workers. Besides having to deal with a physically intense shift the next day, I left them with a lot to handle. Even though I held the lowest position at that job, my supervisors knew that they could rely on me, so I had a work of 2 to 3 people that was more suitable for an assistant manager. Since I was on good terms with one of my former co-workers, every now and then she'd let me know how things were. They ended up hiring 2 new guys to try and fill the hole I left, but a fake. They were never able to match what I was able to do. Prior to them being hired, my supervisors tried to spread out all of the work that I left behind. That resulted in the employees that worked there being overworked, and it all turned into a shit show. 3 months after I left, my former supervisors were still trying to get me to come back, but I didn't want to. Eventually, I found out that my head supervisor was lying about the promotion/raise that I was promised. It was never on its way. It turned out he did the same to other workers at this job, and he turned most of the employees against him. When everyone found out what a piece of shit he was and how big of a problem he was, he decided to transfer out rather than be fired. It took a few months, but after I quit, a few other workers either left on good terms or had their contracts come to an end and chose not to come back. I like to believe that me quitting was the final straw that eventually led to all of the change that happened at this job. Famous footwear. During the interview, manager wouldn't shut up about how she wanted the other person, but would hire me just to give me a chance. Worked there for 5 shifts on day 2. She went and asked my previous managers about my sex life. The one that really peeved me was she specifically asked my last employer, who was employing my roommate while my roommate was on shift, if I was sleeping with my roommate. On day 3 she got mad at me for doing something wrong after refusing to train me. I asked numerous times about pricing shoes. She would just do one silently without showing me where to look on the scanner or what exactly she was scanning or anything, and then hand it back as if she had retrained me. On day 4 she berated me, saying if I quit it would royally fuck her vacation up, which was the only reason she hired me over the other person. But now she wouldn't have time to train a new person to cover her vacation, which was still 2 months out. My roommate put in notice at her job on this day. On day 5 manager hears that roommate got a better job. She confronts me saying I better not quit, and then asks if I planned on putting in 2 weeks. I tell her I'd been considering, because she refused to train me and she was asking inappropriate questions to my previous employers. She went off on me, yelling at me on the sales floor, telling me not to ever come back. She then put that she had terminated me in my paperwork due to insubordination and theft, as well as sending my one and only paycheck to the wrong address 5 times before I finally got ours to just cancel the old checks and mail it directly to me. Edit. My last day was on a Saturday. All except one of her staff quit by the following Tuesday. 3 days later, I accidentally brought one of the box knives home. I called asking if she wanted it back, and she threatened to call the cops if I ever showed up again. During the trying to get my check, I mentioned the questioning of my previous employers. They said they would deal with it. I moved out of town and never went back anyway, so not sure if she still works there. I did get my check, however she lied about how much I would be making, so I was about $30 short because I was making $13 hourly instead of $14.50. Was so fed up with everything I said fuck that and just called it the amount I would willingly pay to have her out of my life forever. From an old MC post, the setup years ago. I worked support for a tech company for a little over a year. It was a small firm that provided websites controlled on the client side by an archaic program that had been coded in the early zeros, and the only major updates to the thing were to make it work on newer versions of Windows. I was hired on as tier 1 tech support. They didn't have a tier 2 tech support at the time, but they said they were looking to create that role and planned on transitioning me towards that new position after a couple of months to get my feet wet in the system. Get your interview promises in writing. People point. The place was a clusterfuck. Turnover was ridiculous. Hours were long, and the occasional free lunch and beers at the company meeting once a week were supposed to make up for it. The people at the top were deluded, and the people at the bottom were overworked and tended to use the place as a stepping stone to getting enough experience for a job somewhere else. Around this time I also started self-publishing on the side. Writing had always been my passion and ultimate career goal, and I quickly went from making beer and pizza money to making as much money as I was making at my day job. In this time I held up my end of the bargain though. I learned the system inside and out. I knew enough about web development that I could make fixes and updates that used to be sent to the web team, which could take a week or longer because they were as overworked as everyone else. I became friends with the head of the product dev team and helped create better processes for funneling serious bug reports to them and shielding them from piddling bullshit, which they loved. Basically I was doing the tier 2 job they'd promised me, but they kept my job description and pay the same as everyone else, all while promising me they would make the new position soon, and I just needed to hang on. Then one day I'm passing by my boss's office and hear him talking about me. He says they are going to create a new position eventually, but it's going to be at least half a year out because they don't want to hire another warm body to fill the tier 1 spot, and why bother when I'm doing all this higher level work at a lower pay grade. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. I called my wife and explained the situation. She was just as pissed and said it was time to pull the trigger. I decided to wait out a couple of paychecks, but a month before my planned quitting date I was checked out. Cue malicious compliance mode. The sales team and unpaid extras tickets came in with clients asking for updates to their sites that should have been quoted out to the sales team for cold hard cash, but always ended up getting done for free through support when they beached to the president. I started gleefully telling them no and referring them to the sales team because that wasn't something that should be handled by the support department. Sales naturally hated this. They saw their job as landing new clients, and they didn't have the time to deal with clients bothering them for bullshit add-ons to their website that don't make us commission. Whoops, the boss had a conversation with me about this. I pointed out that I was just following procedure and trying to refer things to the appropriate department. Boss was clearly annoyed and told me to be a team player. I continued being a team player by referring angry clients to the sales team who was supposed to handle those calls. Flooding the web devs. Remember all those little fixes I was making to websites that took some of the heat off of the web development team? It reduced turnaround for support tickets and allowed the web people to focus on making money. Win-win. Unfortunately, once I decided I was out of there, it was also time for me to follow my job description to the letter. That meant that any requests for updates to client websites had to be routed to the web team. Delays for these fixes quickly increased to weeks, and I explained to clients that we were just following standard procedure and routing things to the correct team to make sure it got done correctly. The bug backlog. Any support tickets for serious bugs in the system had been routed through me because I'd been working with the dev team, right? Well, I told my boss that unfortunately I was so busy with my very important tier 1 job responsibilities as described that I wouldn't have time to do the high level bug routing any longer. The end result was a return to the bad old days. Tickets got logged and sent over to the developers. Yes, the support team had direct access to product devs and could walk over and bug them whenever under the old system, and their productivity took a hit, while clients got frustrated because if you take a scattershot approach to identifying and fixing bugs, it takes longer to identify and fix bugs. Who older thunk it? Brutally honest, this isn't malicious compliance exactly, but it was pretty fun. I had my own gig going, and I didn't need a reference, so anytime a client would go to an executive to try and do an end run for something impossible, I would simply be honest to the exec, rather than tap dancing around the problem point. So, for example, I upset the president when he told me I wasn't good with clients, and I told him that being terrified of telling a client no and wasting countless man hours having people research how to do something impossible, and eventually going back to the client to tell them the answer we knew within the first 5 minutes was worse. The VP of sales got mad and asked why I couldn't be more helpful with an issue a client was having with something that's an industry standard. I politely asked him if he could provide me with a dealer in and a flux capacitor so we could go back to 1987 when they implemented the standard he was complaining about and ask them to change it. Mic drop. After that last one, I got called into my boss's office for the last time. He told me that I needed to watch my tone and be a better team player. That if I wasn't able to handle all my responsibilities, then I needed to work longer hours rather than stop doing them. He asked if I had any response. I told him I was putting in my notice. I'd heard him talking about stringing me along, and for the next 2 weeks I wasn't going to do a damn thing that wasn't in my job description. Was I a little unprofessional there at the end? Probably, but this workplace was anything but professional. In the year and a half I ended up working there, they regularly screwed over their workers, and I figured I had that rarest of rare opportunities to tell them where they could take their job and shove it by doing the job exactly as it was described. TLDR, crappy company promises new hires the world, overworks them, and I found myself in a unique position to not only quit but fuck with them on the way out through some good old-fashioned malicious compliance. Lickwarland. After being lied to, screwed out of a healthy redundancy package that I was entitled to, and had a bevy of false accusations placed against me so they could fire me, none of them stuck because they were made up, I quit in my own special way. I first waited until my store manager, area manager and state manager all were on annual leave and I'd be running the shop. I then got a doctor's note giving me 3 weeks off work for a strained back muscle. That afternoon, on Friday, the busiest trading day of the week, half an hour after taking over, I wrote my resignation emails. One went to the CEO, upper management and board members detailing how I'd been screwed over by my managers for the previous 18 months, threatening legal action and going to the press if my leave payouts were withheld. The second was to my area manager's email, who was uncontactable on leave, stating my 2 weeks notice to resign, and attaching a copy of my doctor's certificate that said I was unable to work. Then, I shut and locked the doors, threw the keys in the safe and went home. I turned my phone off, drank 2 bottles of wine, and played the fuck out of some Final Fantasy. On the following Monday, I checked my bank account to find all my annual leave paid out, and my 2 weeks of notice paid out as sick leave. Still, fuck you Lickwarland. I refused to buy at any West Amazon store thanks to the way I was treated.